Metroid. The enigmatic action-adventure game of Nintendo has ushered in a revolution of platforming and exploration. But how did this highly acclaimed series get to this kind of prestige? To the first game in 1986 to the latest Metroid Other M. To discuss this topic with more clarity, we will have to discuss the evolution of Metroid. Now, before we talk about how ridiculously strong Samus' power beam is, let's begin with the very first Metroid game. Metroid for the NES was released all the way back in 1986 by Nintendo Research and Development along with Intelligent Systems. The period of time was best characterized by oversprayed hair and questionable outfits. During this era, a game featured a bounty hunter known as Samus Aran as she explores the planet Zebes. This game literally can be described in just one sentence: an action-adventure game where you can explore the world and gain power-ups to access new locations. That description in itself is rather simple, but it works. This Metroid formula literally took the world by storm as many people were captivated in exploring dangerous new locations as a battle-hardened bounty hunter. Also, the name Metroid came from the words Metro and Android, foreboding to the fact that the game takes place underground and you play as a robot-looking person. But hold up, there is something really special about this game. It featured one of the first female protagonists in video games known as Samus Aran. In fact, the only way you knew about this at that period of time is to beat the game in a certain amount of time. Needless to say, that implementation has given the franchise massive prestige. Not only that, but seriously, the satisfaction of starting out with a pea shooter for a weapon and ending up with a Chuck Norris ray is just flipping awesome. Speaking of which, Samus can morph into a morph ball, which ironically enough was only done by the development team to save time as opposed to animating her crawl. In addition, Samus can also obtain armor upgrades, missiles, high jump boots, energy tanks, and a most beloved screw attack. As most Metroid fans already know, is that the game featured a password system, but in the Famicom Disk System release, a save system was implemented kind of similar to the one found in the first Zelda game. Also, what I really love about this game is the amount of references it has towards the Alien movie franchise, which I'm a huge fan of. For example, both stars a female protagonist and have creatures that latch on people's heads. Both takes place in space and exploring uncharted planets, and ends up with an explosion at the end. Brilliant. The next game up is Metroid 2: The Return of Samus, and my god, I love the intro music. It really reminds me of the Alien movie series. Anyways, this game is without a doubt one of the more underrated games in the series, or at least before a bunch of fan remakes of the game came out. In this game, Samus Aran travels to the Metroid homeworld of SR388 to exterminate a bunch of glowing jellyfish known as the Metroids. In all seriousness, this game happens to be one of my favorite games in the series. Along with being the first Metroid handheld game, in order to progress to new locations, you have to kill a fixed number of Metroids. In addition, the player is given a greater spectrum to aim weaponry. For example, you can actually aim down this time around along with crouch firing. Not only that, but the spider and spring ball made its original debut in this game. Also, Metroid 2 is the first game in the series to introduce the save station. Other than that, the game does feature some updated new sprites. In addition, this is the Metroid game that really specified Samus' suit design that will later be used for pretty much the rest of the series. Also, this game does feature the first iteration of Samus' gunship. Moving on and keeping in line with the Alien references made to the Metroid franchise, a lot of similarities between Metroid 2 and the movie Aliens is made. They both go to the homeworld of their respective alien species. The same female protagonist ends up fighting the queen version of that particular alien, and there's a big explosion afterwards. You know, come to think of it, the Metroid series does have a thing for big explosions. Alright, this is one of the games in the series that I'm really excited to talk about: Super Metroid. This game just exerts this foreboding and enigmatic atmosphere that the Metroid series is iconic for. Needless to say, this is considered by many not to be one of the best Metroid games, but one of the best games ever created. Also, this game happens to be the first Metroid game I ever played. The dark and ambient atmosphere and the mystery of the land really fleshed out the gameplay in my perspective. Also, a much greater spectrum of aiming is showcased as the player can aim diagonally. Moving on, the charge beam has actually been introduced in this game. Speaking of which, you can turn on and off upgrades in the inventory menu. Now, along with that, Super Metroid actually implemented a lot of new mechanics to the franchise. Not only the charge beam, but the speed booster, grappling beam, super missiles, reserve tanks, x-ray scope, the gravity suit, and of course, moonwalking made its appearance in the game. The story takes place directly after Metroid 2, when a baby Metroid imprints on Samus and thinks she's its mother. Samus delivers the baby Metroid to some scientists when a distress call is heard. Samus investigates and everyone everyone's favorite overgrown lizard Ridley kidnaps the baby. Samus must then travel back to Zebes, and pretty much an intergalactic version of To Catch a Predator is showcased. But seriously, this game is simply breathtaking. I remember playing this game alone at night as a kid and being amazed on the creepy yet beautiful serene environments. If you haven't played this game yet and you love dark and mysterious environments, then you will have a blast playing this game. Now, right after Super Metroid was released back in 1994, the longest Metroid drought in the franchise's history occurred, when no Metroid game was released for nearly a decade. There was talk of a Metroid game coming to the Nintendo 64, but development for it never really took off. It was only until the release of the Game Boy Advance back in 2001 when another 2D handheld Metroid game came out. Enter Metroid Fusion. In all honesty, if you take Fusion at face value, this game is one of the least innovative games in the franchise. In fact, one of the more notable things about the game is that it introduces the navigation room, which does speak volumes about the game's linearity. Other than that, Fusion is a very linear game when it comes to the Metroid series. In fact, player progression is almost exclusive to story progression, but that's not to say the game is bad. I had loads of fun playing it. Fusion does take a lot of elements from Super Metroid and try to present them in a different fashion. Now, let's talk about the story, and boy, this is going to start a debate in the comments section. It's the issue regarding the balance of story and gameplay in the Metroid series. Ironically, the lesser the story or character depth given to a Metroid game, the better it is reviewed. Just look at Super Metroid and Metroid Prime, considered to be the pinnacle of the franchise, and both have very little story and it focuses primarily on delivering a quality gameplay performance. That's not to say story doesn't have a place in Metroid, it's just that story hasn't really been presented in a way that can complement the Metroid formula, as opposed to going against it. However, I digress. Metroid Fusion is a great addition of the Metroid series, and I had loads of fun playing this game. In fact, this game does feature some neat missile upgrades, such as the Ice and Diffusion missiles. The story revolves around Samus Aran when she returns to SR-388. After she exterminates the Metroid species, she then comes into contact with a mysterious organism known as the X-Parasite that nearly kills her. To save her life, she's injected with the Metroid DNA from the baby Metroid. When she recovers, she heads to a biologic space research station to investigate an explosion. She then is spiraled into a set of events that is actually pretty interesting. Now, before we digress too much, let's move on to the final available 2D Metroid, Metroid Zero Mission. This game is another personal favorite of mine, as it took the original Metroid formula and just expanded on it using Super Metroid's trailblazing. However, there are differences between this game and the original. For example, new areas such as Crateria, Chozodia, and the Space Pirate Mothership, in addition with an updated upgrade list. The story is pretty much a retelling and expansion of the original. Space pirates have come into the possession of Metroids, and it is up to Samus to completely dissolve the threat of using Metroids as a biological weapon. A really neat thing about this game is that you can play as Zero Suit Samus once you lose all of your equipment near the ending. In all honesty, I loved this particular moment in the game. I'm telling you, being completely defenseless as Zero Suit Samus and being picked on relentlessly by the space pirates as a result, and suddenly regaining all of your weapons and equipment again to just go John Rambo revenge on all of them is simply stunning. Now, since we have discussed all the 2D Metroid games, let's get into a quick summary. These games in the Metroid series stuck with the original formula and have brought it up. Of the 2D Metroid games, Super Metroid is arguably the pinnacle of that gameplay philosophy. To support that, Super Metroid is by far the most innovative game in this lineup. All the other 2D Metroid games that came after really just tried to reformulate what Super Metroid laid the foundation for. Now that we have covered the 2D Metroid games, let's discuss the evolution of 3D Metroid games. To start things off, let's begin with the illustrious Metroid Prime. This game is honestly one of the best games I ever played. Metroid Prime pretty much revolutionized the Metroid gaming franchise. For the first time ever, Metroid is in first person and it works to near perfection. Alright, if anyone watching this hasn't played Metroid Prime, then rush out and buy this game. Calling this game exceptional would be an understatement. Moving on, this game is one of the more innovative games in the series. It brought Metroid to a 3D spectrum and introduced the franchise to a brand new view of gameplay, whether it is in first-person combat or solving puzzles. When it comes to items, this game first introduces the Boost Ball, which allows the Morph Ball to obtain a boost of speed, useful for half-pipe puzzles, in addition with introducing these neat visor upgrades that make you feel like Predator. Before I move on from this game, there is one thing I want to point out. In Metroid Prime, a scanning mechanic is implemented that tells the player more about the overworld. This tool further immerses the player in the environment. environment. In fact, gameplay immersion seems to be really emphasized in this game, whether it is in terms of fog, creatures' blood, lava, or the reflection of Samus's face on her visor. Immersion is a premium for this game, and that's why I also believe that Metroid Prime story is one of the best ones told in the Metroid series. For example, in order to find out more about the story of Metroid Prime, you have to find out yourself by scanning and exploring the environment, as opposed to being guided by someone else and let the story be spoon-fed to you. It is this very non-linear storytelling that really fleshed out the atmosphere of this game. The story revolves around Samus exploring Talon 4, as she discovers this toxic substance known as Phazon. She must then figure out how to obtain entry into the impact crater and save the planet. Again, the atmosphere is truly astonishing. Speaking of which, I love this game's soundtrack. Seriously, listen to it for yourselves if you have time. Again, if you see this for sale, then buy it. You will not regret it. Now, if you guys want a neat mixture of Zelda and Metroid mechanics, then check out Metroid Prime 2 Echoes. This game implements a dark and light world which is reminiscent to Link to the Past. Also, not only is the game possibly the darkest Metroid game, but this game is certainly interesting. Really, in terms of core gameplay, it is not too different from Prime 1. It is still a first-person adventure. In addition, with being the most difficult Prime game, this piece of interactive entertainment introduces a concept of duality, along with lore to flesh out a really eerie mood, especially when exploring in the dark world. Also, this game first introduced the secret missiles, which really makes you feel like Predator. Also, if I may add, I love the light suit design. It's probably my favorite suit design, mainly because how original it looks, but let's move on. The story of this game is as follows. Samus travels to the planet Aether in search of missing Federation soldiers. She finds their zombified bodies, and the closest thing to a zombie apocalypse in a Metroid game takes place. Right afterwards, our hero Sammy gets to meet this Luminoth guy and later saves the planet from her dark equivalent. Also, Metroid Prime 2 Echoes is the first Metroid game to introduce multiplayer. However, the multiplayer is pretty generic. There are only 2 modes, but all things considering, it is a fun time when you have a couple of friends over. Now, let's move on to the final handheld Metroid game, Metroid Prime Hunters. Now, the single player of this game is nothing really to write home about. You can fly to different planets, which I did enjoy. Also, considering the hardware limitations of the Nintendo DS, the game is pretty stellar. And wow, I really need to stop with these puns. The main thing I want to talk about is the multiplayer, which is pretty addicting. I actually got this game day one and I got to experience the multiplayer when Nintendo Wi-Fi connection was still on for this game, and it is incredibly fun and satisfying. Unlike the multiplayer in Metroid Prime 2, there is actually a ranking system in this game, and hosts several unique and fun game modes. Plus, for the first time in any Metroid game, you can play as someone besides Samus. All in all, I enjoyed the multiplayer component. Alright, now let's end the Prime series of Metroid games. Enter Metroid Prime 3 Corruption. This game is the first one to implement motion controls. Some new things that this game introduced is to have Samus's gunship to fight alongside with you. Well, kind of. You can have your gunship to bombard enemies with missiles, but this game doesn't really give the player that many opportunities to do so. Also, this game introduced a more accessible hyper mode, which basically makes Samus completely invincible. Needless to say, this is probably one of the easiest Metroid games in the franchise. However, I still managed to enjoy the game. This game, however, introduces a more in-depth story, but as a result of being a more story-focused Metroid game, non-linearity is lost and the element of isolation is almost completely gone, but the game is still very enjoyable. Now, let's talk about the 3D Metroid games in a summary. Out of all the 3D games, Metroid Prime 1 brought more innovation, but at this point, we have 2 distinct styles of Metroid games, the 2D style and the 3D style, and this is where we get to the final game in the series, Metroid Other M. Alright, I know this game has pretty bad reputation, but for a moment, let's take a look at what this game tried to do at a blank perspective. Before Metroid Other M, there are 2 distinct styles of Metroid gameplay. Metroid Other M attempted to merge both styles of play. And how did it turn out? Well, decently. In all honesty, the biggest problem I have with Metroid Other M is the story, which is another topic all in itself. But Metroid Other M really isn't a bad game as people say it is. I will admit that moving a 3D Samus using a D-pad is really awkward, but the controls are simple simple and the gameplay runs smoothly. Due to being the heaviest story-driven Metroid game in the series, the game does take a much more linear path. But let's look at how Metroid Other M incorporated past gaming mechanics, towards merging many of its mechanics pioneered by Super Metroid, and at the same time bringing a first-person style as showcased in Metroid Prime. While I admit, the game certainly does have its hiccups, the game really shouldn't be ostracized as the way it has been. And this is what I discovered about both growing up playing Metroid and making this video, that the evolution of Metroid is really an evolution of experimentation and breaking new ground. Metroid, the enigmatic action-adventure game of Nintendo, has ushered in a revolution of platforming and exploration. But how did this highly acclaimed series get to this kind of prestige? Well, by experimentation and breaking new ground. For example, the very first Metroid game broke insane ground when introducing one of the first female protagonists in gaming, which is the bounty hunter known as Samus Aran, or in Super Metroid, which arguably redefined what is a 2D action-adventure game. This game broke new ground where you can see games from completely different franchises borrow elements from. And finally in Metroid Prime, where first person meets action-adventure in complete harmony. As you can see, it was this experimentation of trying new things and breaking new ground is what shaped the evolution of Metroid. Metroid Other M attempted to experiment and break new ground as well, and while it had its blunders, I believe Nintendo has listened to cues from the fanbase as a result. Perhaps Nintendo is planning something big for the next iteration of Metroid, something innovative, something that will break new ground, something that will redefine the Metroid experience. While we don't know where the Metroid franchise will lead us into next, I just can't help but wonder where Metroid will evolve into next. Well, I hoped you enjoyed this video. This one took a while to edit and I really hoped you enjoyed it. For the next evolution video, I'm going to give you guys another decision. Comment below on which one you would like to see. The evolution of Mario or the evolution of Pokemon. Comment below on which one you would like to see. Next evolution video will be up on February 9th. Anyways, I sincerely hope you enjoyed this video. I had loads of fun making this one. Anyways, please like, comment, and subscribe if you're new. Till then, this is the video of the day.
Hey guys, I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to see more Metroid, then watch this video about the tragic story about my life. If not, then I'm just going to keep on jogging.